the slow controlled rate, and that is the ignition for my gunpowder. It is important to bear in mind why we still call them firearms even to this day. Gunpowder does not just magically go off when you pull the trigger. You have to set fire to it. Now, just about every firearm invented after the matchlock has some means of creating its own fire at the moment that it's needed, whether that be through friction or chemical reaction, external or internal. It creates that spark when it needs it. This weapon does not, and so you've got to carry that fire around with you. And you figure, what better way to set off gunpowder than to shove burning rope into it, right? That's the way the weapon works. Very simple operating system. I'll show you all the moving parts. That's all of them. Trigger there operates that curved arm called a serpentine. Squeeze the trigger and it swings the serpentine. That is it. That's all the weapon does. All the serpentine does is hold on to one of those burning ends of match so that when you squeeze the trigger, you lower that burning core directly into the pan, which of course when the weapon is loaded is filled with gunpowder. Very crude. But its simplicity also makes it fairly reliable. There is so little going on there. There is not much to go wrong. And again, just about every time you stick burning rope into gunpowder, chances are pretty good it's going to go boom. So in this case, simplicity definitely equals reliability. Now, in the hands of a trained musketeer, a weapon like this one is going to give you an effective range of about 100 yards. That is a distance at which that soldier is expected to be able to hit who he is aiming at most of the time. Not a lot of precision at that distance. The soldier might be aiming at his opponent's head and hit him in the knee. Doesn't matter, he's out of the fight. So it's not about winning shooting competitions, it's about achieving the tactical goal. Make somebody stop shooting back. That's what they're aiming for. Even if you miss them completely, but the sound of it going whistling past their ear makes them suddenly remember that they need to be elsewhere, the weapon did its job. The weapon, it's important to bear in mind what it's intended to go up against as well. This is a weapon specifically meant for dealing with heavy infantry and cavalry on the battlefields of Europe. There's lots of different types of firearms. They're all meant for different things. The musket, it's a heavy-hitting weapon meant for dealing with hard targets, armored infantry and cavalry. Really specifically what that means is you've got to overcome armor and you've got to go overcome horses. Bear in mind, by this time period, armor has shared the battlefield with gunpowder for a couple of centuries. So it's not just meant to stop edged weapons like swords and pikes. It's not just meant to stop edged projectiles like arrows and that sort of thing. It is meant to be bullet resistant by this time period. Now, there's varying qualities of armor. Some definitely work better than others. No real standardization, but if you want to have a weapon that's reliably going to take a soldier off the battlefield regardless of what he's wearing, it's going to have to be pretty hefty to take out somebody who's wearing armor that is meant to resist bullets. Plus, it's a pretty tall order to drop a horse as well. A war horse, 1,200-pound animal chock full of adrenaline. Not an easy thing to stop. But that's what this weapon is meant to do. To even be considered a musket, it's got to be firing at least a 1/12 of a pound of lead, which puts it in the neighborhood of 75 caliber or 3/4 inch diameter. Coming out of that weapon, moving close to the speed of sound, around 800 to 1,000 feet per second. It's a lot of kinetic energy, and it is enough to pretty reliably either rip a hole through the armor or do so much damage to the armor, cave it in, and the like, that the man inside is not fighting anymore. And it'll pretty reliably drop a horse within that effective range of 100 yards. So pretty hard-hitting weapon. A trained musketeer is also expected to be able to load and fire his weapon twice in a minute, 2 aimed shots in a minute, which, given everything you have to do to prepare that weapon for the next shot, it's moving pretty quick. But it's not a high rate of fire, and that's why this is very much a teamwork-oriented weapon. You want to go out with a big group of people so you can take turns firing at the enemy and protect each other as you're reloading. Typically, a company of musketeers is going to be several ranks deep, several rows of soldiers deep, and those ranks are going to rotate as they fire so that you're constantly bringing those who have finished reloading back to the front of the formation. This is going to allow the group as a whole to fire as many as 10 times in a minute, while each individual is only firing once or twice in a minute. So teamwork is key, and of course that's true with any weapon system. In any circumstance, if you go off and fight by yourself, you're not coming back. It's always about teamwork, regardless of how you're armed. You need a team of people out there. The Virginia Company of London finds this particularly advantageous here at Jamestown, as it gives them a certain amount of battlefield advantage when they're up against the Powhatan. And they need it. Powhatan warriors are training from the age of 5 or 6. There's a tremendous amount of skill that these Englishmen are going up against there. And in particular, they are extraordinarily skilled archers. The English, especially at this time, will not readily admit that anyone is better than them at anything. And especially when it comes to archery. This is the culture that gives us Robin Hood. For centuries, they held an archery advantage with the longbow over most everybody else in Europe. They will not readily admit that somebody is going to shoot a bow better than them. So coming from this cultural perspective, Alexander Whitaker writes, in regard to the Powhatan archers, I suppose there be no better marksmen in the world with a bow than they be. For they will shoot beasts running, birds flying, and fish swimming. Think about that. Any kind of moving target, in any circumstance, they can put an arrow into it. And he goes on to say, and they shoot with such great strength that one of ours, taken without defensive arms, meaning armor, was shot clean through his body, the arrow nailing both his arms to his sides. So if that Powhatan warrior gets within his effective range, what are the chances that you're going to get hit with an arrow as an English soldier?
90%.
Real good. Yeah. Real good chance you're going to get hit with an arrow. Which is why they, again, lean so heavily on the musket. You can shoot twice as far with the musket as the Powhatan can effectively with his bow. About 40 yards. That's a range at which the English describe the Powhatan as being able to hit specific targets with their arrow. So you get twice the effective range, you get a lot more knockdown power, and it's also why the English come to rely so heavily on armor. Armor the majority of your vitals, so that hopefully you can take a few arrows and keep fighting. Those arrows strike the armor is going to protect you. If the arrows strike your extremities, it shouldn't be immediately lethal and might not even take you out of the fight right away. So greatly limiting the effectiveness of those arrows. The other big advantage for the Virginia Company with this weapon is its ease of use. Traditional weapons like the bow and the sword take years of training to get proficient. You have to grow up learning how to use them. It's a matter of weeks to become proficient with this. I can teach just about anybody, as long as they're tall enough to see over the barrel, in an afternoon how to use it. And a couple of weeks of practice gets you fast and accurate. So when you've got carpenters and blacksmiths and bakers and sturgeon dressers and all the people the Virginia Company has brought to build a colony, feed a colony, and make money for the company, who also have to help defend the colony, this is the only weapon they've even got that they have time to learn how to use. And it just happens to be the one that gives them a tactical advantage over the Powhatan. So it's easy to see why they come to rely on it so heavily, so quickly. Now, the ammunition to operate the weapon traditionally is going to be carried in the bandolier. What we're going to do now is walk through the process without gunpowder so we can talk about how everything works, and then we'll load it up and fire it again. Now, you're going to start by first priming the pan at the rear of the weapon. Priming powder is going to be carried in the flask. You're going to use a little bit of that powder to fill the pan. Close the pan cover so the powder stays put. Make sure there's no excess powder outside the pan that could cause the weapon to go off early. Cast it about. Each one of these chargers carries just enough gunpowder to propel one bullet, measured out ahead of time so you don't have to stop and measure on the battlefield. Pop the top, dump that powder down the barrel. Draw a musket ball from the pouch on the hip, drop that in on top of the powder. Use a scouring stick to push what at this time is actually a fairly snug bullet all the way down the barrel. Seat it tightly against the gunpowder. Return the scouring stick, recover the weapon. Make sure that match is burning nice and hot. Fix it into the serpentine, check to make sure it's going to land in the right spot, open the pan, exposing the powder, aim the weapon, and squeeze the trigger, lowering the match into the pan. The moment that ember touches the priming powder flashes, the flash travels through a small hole called a vent, sets off the main charge, and sends the ball on its way. And again, all of that is expected to be done in about half a minute, or a little less. Now for our demonstrations today, rather than carrying powder in the chargers and priming flasks as they would have done, we are now using paper cartridges, same measured amount of gunpowder, just a little bit different container. Loading process is going to work the same way with a little bit of powder in the pan. Rest of the powder down the barrel. I will not be using a musket ball today, since obviously a bullet would be a little hazardous in the middle of a museum. That's one of the advantages for us using that paper cartridge. The empty paper gives me something to ram in on top of the powder instead of the musket ball to keep everything packed tight down at the breech. With the match set, the weapon is now ready to fire. And again, if you don't care for loud noises, you may wish to cover your ears. Set your pace! Get fire!
When you go to a Revolutionary War museum or a Civil War museum, and you've got this great big gun with these great big wheels, and 5 or 6 men standing around, And when it's time to load the gun, every one of them does a specific part of the process. They shove everything down the barrel of the gun, and then they proceed to prime it and fire it. And that's the way most artillery pieces have worked through most of history. But in the 1500s, the early 1600s, there was a special kind of artillery that we're going to demonstrate for you today. This is a breech-loading gun. Loads from the back, not the front, using canisters or chambers, as they're often called, which looks like a big iron coffee mug. The nice thing about this is you can have as many of those as you can afford, right? I can have a half a dozen of these chambers preset, every one of them loaded up, and then when it comes time to fire that gun, I'm just swapping breeches in and out of the gun. So it's very fast to load. I don't like to brag, but a few years ago during a demonstration, we were able to match a modern artillery crew with a 155 howitzer shot for shot 6 rounds. So, now, different types of guns are used for different situations. So the cannons that you're familiar with, the bigger ones that load from the muzzle, are great for, let's say, I'm attacking a fort, and I want to put holes in that wall. What am I going to shoot out of my cannon to put holes in a wall like that? Cannonballs, right? This is not a cannonball. By definition, in 1607, a cannonball is a ball that is made for a particular gun called a cannon. A cannon throws a 60-pound ball, bigger than my head. This is a falcon ball. Weighs 3 pounds, goes in a gun called a falcon. You don't want to try to remember falcon shot, robinette shot, culverin shot, demi-culverin shot, cannon royale shot. So they just generically call all of this round shot. Round shot is great for knocking holes in stuff, but what if I don't want to knock a hole in something? This is great if I'm trying to put a hole in a fort. It's great if I'm trying to sink a ship. But if I'm trying to stop a ship, either so that I can get away from it or so that I can capture it, maybe I don't want to put a hole in it. Maybe I just want to stop it. What makes a ship go?
People.
The sails, right? The people are going to work the sails, sure. And we'll deal with them in a minute. But let's say I got those sails up there, I want to rip them up so that the ship slows down, right? Is this going to put a very big hole in the sail? No, what I want is a ball that is much, much bigger than this. But I don't want a much, much bigger gun. So what I'm going to do is cut that ball in half and attach the two halves to one another by a length of iron rod or bar. So now my round shot has become bar shot. We're not real clever with the way we name things in the 17th century. The bar shot is 2 halves of a ball or 2 balls connected by a bar or a sliding bar. So now when I fire this thing, it opens up, and as it spins, this is going to rip a much bigger hole in the sail. It's much more likely to tear up the shrouds and the rigging that holds the masts in place. Also effective against the people, as we mentioned before, but that's not really what this is designed for. Chain shot. Same idea as bar shot, but it's got a chain inside instead of a bar. Mug shot. And then when we really want to mess up some people, that's when this comes out. What I have here is a wooden canister. This is called case shot. What's inside? What do you want to put in there? Nails, rocks, broken glass, random scraps of metal, flint shards. How many of you guys saw Pirates of the Caribbean? You remember the part where they're shooting silverware out of the cannon, right? If you want to do that, this is how you do that. Because if you just shove service for 8 down the barrel, in a best case scenario, you're tearing up the inside of the barrel of your gun. In a worst case scenario, your butter knife and your fork get jammed in there together and stop moving down the barrel, and when the explosion stops moving down the barrel, it moves back up the barrel to where you're standing. Not a great idea. So what we've got here is just a wooden canister. It's a cylinder which is split in half and hollowed out. We fill it with assorted nastiness and tie the ends shut with heavy thread. Now I'm going to load this into the gun. When I fire, that thread will burn off. The only thing holding this together is force of habit as it comes out of the muzzle, and the differential in air pressure blows it apart, basically turning our gun into the largest shotgun you ever saw. John Smith loves these things. Orders 36 of them for the fort in 1608, and he doesn't say, send me 36 of these breech-loading swivel guns. He says, send me 36 murdering pieces. So, not too hard to figure out what he intends for those. You guys want to see the shooter? Yeah. All right, now, for safety reasons, I will not actually be firing any shot out of the gun today. On the other side of those trees is a national park. Those guys have no sense of humor about that kind of thing. Alicia and I are going to go through a loading drill based on using that canister, that chamber, which has already been loaded. We're going to go through the different steps of the loading and firing. When we get to the point where I'm actually getting ready to make that joyful noise, we are going to give you plenty of warning, so you'll know when it's time to cover your ears, which I strongly recommend that you do. When you cover your ear, don't stick your fingers in your ears like you always see on TV, because they might get stuck. Take your flat of your hand, cup it over your ears like so. The first thing I got to do is make sure that the gun is in good shape. So I give Alicia the command, order the piece to load. And she's going to go inspect the gun, make sure that since yesterday's demo we haven't had a bird nest in there or something. She checks it out. When she knows that the gun is clear, she'll let me know. And then I give her the command, handle the charge. She's going to go and grab that loaded chamber on the command, advance the charge. She moves it up to the gun. And she will stand there and hold that 30-pound cast iron chamber until I give her the next command. If I stand here all afternoon, she's got to stand there all afternoon holding that thing. It would be really mean. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell her, charge the piece. If we were actually firing shot, we'd put the canister in the back of the barrel, and then she'd put that chamber in behind. We're going to lock that in place with a wedge. That helps to contain the pressure that's being generated by the explosion so that we have as much energy as possible pushing our shot down the barrel. Now the gun is loaded, but it's still not ready to fire. I'm going to take a sharpened bronze wire called priming wire. And I will stick this into a small hole at the back end of the gun called the vent. That makes sure that there's nothing between me and the powder charge, and then I'm going to open a small tube of powder and pour some of it into the top of the chamber, leaving a small pile on top of the gun so that it's ready to go. So I'm going to take the tiller from Alicia. And from here on out, I'm in charge of making sure that I know exactly where that gun is pointed. And when it comes time to fire, I will give her the command. The first thing you're going to hear me yell is "have a care," which is 17th century for look out, y'all. That's when you want to cover your ears. And then the last command will be give fire. On that command, Alicia's going to drop the burning slow match held in her linstock onto the pile of powder, and that's going to set it off. Again, this is going to be very loud. If you have some kind of hearing assistance device, go ahead and turn it off. You won't need it for the rest of the demonstration. If you don't have one and would rather not end up with one, now would be a very good time to cover your ears.
of you, before I start loading here, have heard stories about, well, you have to have 2 opposing teeth to be in the Army. Have you ever heard that? Good. I hope that myth is kind of dying out nowadays. It's one that's been around for a while that has absolutely no truth. Saying that if you didn't have teeth, you couldn't be in the Army. No, we're still going to use you in the Army without teeth. Even if you can't bite the cartridge, you can use your gums, you can rip it with your fingers. And that's what I'm going to do is show you how it works with your fingers instead of biting. Because of this thing right here. So, anyway, you are in your ranks. Musket on the shoulder. I give you the command to prime and load. You bring this across the body, half cock it, grab a cartridge out, bite it, or tear it in this case here. Use that powder to prime the pan. They'll catch sparks later. Close the pan, pass the musket about, turn the cartridge over, flip the whole thing inside the barrel here, draw the rammer, hand it down one time, return it, and now I'm loaded, ready to fire. So when I put this back on my shoulder, the men in charge know I can shoot. So I don't have to ask, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? When I see all of you like this, I know you can shoot. Now before I fire, let me give them a warning over the wall here so they know it's coming. That ought to get their attention. So, you're in your ranks now, elbow to elbow. A second rank is going to fire right over my shoulder here. Giving the command, make, ready! Bring the musket to the full cock here. Present! Level towards the enemy. And you all know the last one. Fire!
So but from here, I'm going to go ahead and handle cartridge all the way out of my shot box. I'm going to get some of my powder. I'm going to rip that cartridge open with my teeth, hold it at my chin, and prime. I'm going to go ahead and pour some powder next to the vent, shut pan, pass the piece of that at my hip, and charge cartridge. Notice I'm not just dropping it all the way down. I'm dumping my powder out of it first, then dropping the paper tube. I don't want to clog the weapon. Here, I want to draw my rammer all the way out of the piece and ram down cartridge. And then I'm going to go ahead, return rammer, and shoulder fire. Now, like I said, all that should be done in about 15 seconds. But is there anybody over there shooting at me today? I've had somebody say yes before. I said, do you know something I don't? Yeah, but no, nobody's shooting at me today. This is a controlled environment, and I can meet that mark almost every time, so just bear that in mind. All right, if you'd like to cover up your ears, folks, go ahead and do so. Go ahead and take both your hands. Take ready. Take aim. Fire! This is yet another reason we want to stand shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow. Not all these weapons are going to go off when we want them to. So again, if I'm by myself, how's my day going? Probably not good. I might be thinking about retreating right about now. I'm still holding it out in front of my face though, because what could still happen? It could possibly still go off, right? I guess we're going to try that one more time. Fire!
That's not loud. No, it's not loud.
Did I win? Probably not. Yeah, so, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and shut this pan, and this would happen during battles, during this war.
I know.
Right, okay, where your weapon malfunctions, you have to stop what you're doing, you have to take a tool out of your pocket, and you're going to have to go ahead and fix this problem as best as you can. What I'm doing is I'm sharpening my flint. I'm not seeing a whole lot of sparks coming out of the weapon. So, now that that's done, cover up one more time.
Let's see if this works.
Fire! Now, that was step by step. Once I fire the weapon once, I get the command to prime and load. I'm going to go ahead and do this all over again.
Gun attention! Search piece!
So first that worm goes in. That'll get any of the loose debris from the last shot out.
Advance sponge! 10 vent!
So the reason for this is there's a hole back here where I'll lay that off eventually. If he was to push the sponge down now, debris could blow out of that, which could be bad for us, but also when he pulled that sponge back out, what's being sucked into the tube? Air. That could fan any flame. So when I seal that off, make a vacuum.
Sponge piece!
That'll be pushed down, give it a couple turns, pulled out. That'll be clear to load. The ammo would be kept in boxes like this back here. We'd have somebody advance the round on the command.
Handle cartridge!
You'd bring it up, hand it off to the loader up here. Then he would prepare to put it in the muzzle. Charge, peace. Then we got to push it to the back. Ram down, cartridge. The other end of the sponge is a rammer to seat that metal. Now we've got to make a fuse, so we're going to go back to the gunner here at the back, who will take care of that with the next command, prime. So we'll take a priming iron and push that down the hole. It's basically like an ice pick that opens up to charge. Then she's going to take a type of fuse called a quill and put that in. They could be made out of quill or feathers. They also could be made out of reeds or paper like we're using. And again, like I said, the quill, which is actually made out of a feather. And a final one would be made out of tin. Paper was used in the Dutch service. It's cheap, it's easy to use. That's what we're going to use it. All right, then before we fire, we got to get it out of the way, because remember, this thing would move back. Make ready! And then the final command would be fire. So on 3, you're going to give me that final command. Here we go. 1, 2, 3! Fire!
I did this to move this easier.
That was so kind of you.